Today, I've been challenged by a mysterious supporter to shed light on a topic that must be seen to be believed, but that if it were fully revealed, would be destroyed in its entirety. If you're willing to take the chance on being hunted down for what you learn here today, I'll do my best to uncover the secrets behind political intrigue in Dungeons and Dragons.
Seriously, thank you, Brett O'Brien, for submitting this topic, and thank you to my tank class supporters who voted for it to be mused upon this week. So, let's talk politics, but not really, because, ew. Political intrigue in Dungeons & Dragons is essentially what happens when two different factions, whether it's the party and another faction or two factions themselves, butt up against each other because they have different goals and desires or things that they don't want, and those are not compatible, fighting up against each other, but not in a direct fashion. Intrigue is essentially something that is hidden or secret that is being used to manipulate the situation, and so political intrigue in D&D typically looks like the party and a, say, big bad evil guy both going towards their goals, which are at cross purposes and not coming down to a fight. Yet, maybe. There's a couple of steps that I've outlined in my brain to sort of kind of help me figure out what's going on here on how to give advice on how to do political intrigue, but the first and foremost and largest portion of it is really around understanding who your factions are, establishing them as fully as possible, and then diving in deep to figure out what their motivations are, what they want, what they don't want, that sort of thing. To establish your factions, it's important in a political intrigue that there is competition, that you don't just have one faction that is completely in one section and another faction over in its own box over here with no overlap. If you want political intrigue between two NPC factions, they need to have some crossover in their areas of expertise. Similarly, if you want conflict with the players, you're going to have the same. So the first thing that I would suggest when you're establishing your factions is to figure out what kind of areas of strength your faction has and what kind of areas of weakness that they have, and determine a list, perhaps on a quick brainstorm, of 10 secrets that you could identify that they have for each of these individual factions. Things that could be learned that might give sort of blackmail motivation, power over them, or things that could be learned that would tell you what those areas of strength are or what those areas of weakness are, that'll help you to understand those factions as well as possible. You're going to want to understand and layer their motivations by delving into what it is that each of these factions wants and what they don't want. Making a list of the top 3 goals is an easy way to do this for each of these different factions. The game Dungeon World, which is often cited by a lot of other DMs, particularly I think Sly Flourish likes to talk about this particular system and a couple of the good little things that can be stolen from it, though maybe I'm getting it mixed up with another DM. Anyway, the fronts system from Dungeon World is an excellent way of looking at faction play in a political sense for D&D. By basically creating these factions as if they were an individual NPC and thinking of them collectively as having this specific goal to go towards and having these specific things about them, you can essentially, after any session of D&D, when you're prepping for the next one, you can take a look at your fronts and start deciding what kind of action they're going to take that's going to move them one step forward, so that as time passes, you can decide when they succeed at one of the steps that's going to advance each of their different agendas. But in order to know what their agendas are, you need to know the top 3 things, I would say, that they want to achieve. And then I would also select a list of 3 things that they do not want to achieve. By having a list of things, or not necessarily that they want to achieve, that they don't want to happen. If you have a list of things that they want, it's all well and good and helps you to drive their story forward. But having a list of the things that they actively don't want to happen, whether that's a rival gaining power or a secret being discovered or something being stolen, having that list of things that they don't want to happen that's important to them is an equally important way to allow and enhance intrigue between the different factions or between your group and the factions around them, because it allows for you to leverage both their wants and their not wants. It's also kind of fun and a great way to add a little more intrigue if you can find a way, perhaps even just with a randomization of a dice, to have them be actively working towards one of the things that they don't want. Find a way to be inconsistent with your ruling, with your decision on what they're going to do. Pick something that they want openly and then have them working against it, and then figure out a way to explain it. For instance, if you had a faction that's main goal was to reassemble a massive war machine, and so they've got scouts all over the place trying to find the pieces to put this together, but at the same time you've got some reason why they're working against creating this war machine. Off the top of my head, the idea that comes to mind would be that they want it to be created, but there's, say, two people within the faction that both want credit for it, and so they're working against each other within the faction in order to stop the war machine from being created by the other guy until they can get into power and so that they can create it, and then they're jockeying back and forth for position. And so because of that, there's intrigue inside of their faction by this inconsistency that's built into their desires. Finding ways to build inconsistency in just makes factions feel more alive and makes politics and the intrigue surrounding it feel more real and interesting and mysterious. And a sense of mystery is something that you want to instill very much in any kind of political intrigue story that you're trying to create. Once you have established factions and you've layered their motivations, it's important that you frequently refer back to these fronts and react to the actions that have taken place. Set a timeline of events that's going to help you to know who's pushing what forward, but then go ahead and react to the actions of your players, as they're really going to be the most important factor in any D&D political intrigue. If you've just got a little mini game of a bunch of factions playing against each other over in the corner, then, I hope you're enjoying playing with yourself, but it's not necessarily going to be terribly interesting or fun for the group at the table unless your players are just absolutely insatiable lore hounds for listening to your world building and what's going on around them, which is not typically the case, but it could happen. So, what the players do needs to impact the decisions that are being made, and when it does, you need to react appropriately. Just treat the faction as if the entirety of it was one NPC, and decide how that NPC would react to what's happening to them as a whole, and work your way out from there. Also important in a D&D game that your players are front and center in the story. And one of the mistakes that a published adventure that attempts to do politics really failed at was in Tyranny of Dragons. The factions that you were attempting to woo to your side as the protagonists in that adventure, you were basically trying to establish yourself as being popular enough for them to choose you in the upcoming battle to lead them and make the decisions. But one of the things that was a little bit weird was that you were the center of the story and you were the heroes that were doing all the good stuff, and you were out there working for them, doing all the things that they wanted you to do because they were the powerful faction, and yet none of them really seemed to care about you particularly, and none of them wanted to earn your favor. They all expected you to earn theirs. Making the characters desirable in a political intrigue sense makes them powerful, makes them interesting, and makes them interested as players. It allows you to draw them in instead of hoping that your players are enough of the political animals that they're going to pull on this. In a good political intrigue in D&D, I would say that you've got factions that dislike the players, factions that like the players, or multiple factions that want the players to do something for them that is at cross purposes. And so both sides might be trying to sweeten the deal and woo the players, or confuse and deceive the players into doing what they want. And that allows you to build a story that's fun inside of this circumstance. One of the best ways to build a story that drives towards any kind of style that you're looking for is to remember that you are what you eat. If you want to build a good political story, then you need to be absorbing some politics. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that you absorb real life politics as a way to improve your Dungeons and Dragons, but political dramas and political thrillers, whether watched or read, are a great way to see what plots of intrigue might look like that can turn into fun gameplay. You can't create them in the same way because you don't have that kind of control as a DM, but what you can do is take a look and think about the underlying motivations. What was it that each side wanted? What was it that they didn't want? Where were they inconsistent? And what kind of plots were they putting out into the world in order to make these things happen? Was it betrayals or espionage? Was it blackmail or extortion? What kind of plots were being utilized to create the story? Once you have drilled back into those pieces, you can import those into your games to create your own stories. Thank you again to the Tank Class supporters for all that you do by voting on these different topics so that we know what we're going to talk about, and I hope that you enjoy getting it a little bit earlier than everybody else who's watching this. Thanks so much for watching, and happy adventuring.